My dad said we're selling the family business, and he cheered when he told me I get nothing. Thanksgiving dinner and said, we're selling the family company, and you're getting nothing. My siblings actually clapped. I didn't flinch. I just leaned back, folded my hands, and asked calmly, who's the buyer? Dad puffed up like he'd orchestrated the deal of the century. Summit Ridge Capital. They're paying $50 million. I let out a small laugh. Dad, I am Summit Ridge Capital. Silence table so hard it felt physical. My name is Lauren Avery, 32 years old, the overlooked middle child of the Avery software empire. Walking into our Boston estate that afternoon, I could already tell something was off. Dad kept checking his phone, whispering to my mom like a kid about to brag about a secret trophy. They had no idea that underneath my simple black dress sat someone they had spent a lifetime underestimating. The announcement he planned to make at dinner? It was going to change our family, but not in the way he imagined. If you've ever been part of a family business where loyalty only flows in one direction, you'll understand exactly why I'm telling this story. I grew up in Brookfield Heights, one of the wealthiest suburbs outside Boston. Our colonial-style mansion had 6 bedrooms, a heated indoor pool, and a lawn so big it needed a full crew to maintain. From the outside, we were the picture of American success. My grandfather, Walter Avery, had built Avery Systems from his garage back in 1978 with a second-hand computer and an idea that changed small business inventory forever. By the time he passed the company to my dad, Charles Avery, in '95, it was worth $10 million and growing fast. Dad turned that into $50 million, and he never let anyone forget it. Every holiday, every cookout, every family vacation somehow circled back to his brilliance. The Avery name became a staple in Boston business circles, and he made sure the world worshipped it almost as much as we were expected to. We were 3 Avery kids. Was the golden boy. He studied communications, coasted through classes, partied more than he studied, and still walked into a vice president title the day he graduated. He spent more time on his boat than in the office, but in Dad's eyes, he was destined to inherit everything. Then there was me, Lauren, permanently stuck in the middle. Unlike my siblings, I inherited my grandfather's obsession with technology. I taught myself coding when I was 12, built my first app at 15, and graduated from MIT with honors. I brought real innovations to the table, innovations Dad dismissed without hesitation. And finally, Chloe, 29, the baby. She used our last name as a social media brand, posting perfect little clips of New England old money living. She had no interest in the real business, only in the image of being part of it. Mom, Linda, came from traditional Boston wealth. Her conflict management strategy was simple. Avoid it, smile through it, and pour another glass of Chardonnay. She meant well, but she always stepped back the moment Dad gave that sharp look that shut down any opinion that didn't match his own. Family dinners were exhausting. Dad and Ethan monopolized the conversation with half-understood business jargon, while I sat there knowing more about the company than both of them combined. Any contribution I offered got a pat on the head and a condescending smile. "That's sweet, Lauren," Dad would say, "but let the people who understand the real world talk." It still makes my stomach twist. My breaking point came at 22. Fresh out of MIT, I developed a cloud-based integration system, years ahead of the competition. I spent months preparing a polished proposal. Market analysis, financial projections, technical specs, all of it. Dad finally let me pitch to the board. I walked into that dark mahogany boardroom with my laptop and a heart full of hope. 10 minutes into my presentation, Dad checked his watch, sighed dramatically, and raised his hand to stop me. "I think we've seen enough," he said, smiling too tightly. "This is all very imaginative, but not realistic for serious enterprise clients." He turned to the board. "She means well. She just graduated. She's full of academic ideas." They chuckled. I felt myself disappearing as I packed up my laptop. That night, in my tiny childhood bedroom, I made a promise. I would never let him dismiss me again. I left Boston the next week with $5,000 of savings and 2 suitcases. My parents thought it was a tantrum. Dad joked to my mom on the phone that I'd come crawling back once the real world humbled me. They had no idea what I was about to build. San Francisco was brutal. My studio apartment ate nearly every dollar I earned. I survived on cheap noodles and burnt coffee while working endless hours, first as a junior developer, then as a freelancer. Dream. Solver, I created Summit Ridge Capital under a pseudonym, L. Cooper. L as in Lauren Elise. One knew it was me. I wanted my success to be earned, not inherited. I started small, building enterprise tools for startups. By year 3, I had 10 employees and a real office in Soma. My breakthrough came when I created a platform that connected outdated legacy systems with modern cloud services. Ironically, almost exactly what Dad had refused to adopt. Venture capital followed. Blankets affiliates followed. Growth followed. Summit Ridge became a $200 million company with offices in 3 cities. I kept control of it, stayed behind the scenes, and let my COO be the public face whenever possible. To my family, I was still the kid figuring things out. While Summit Ridge grew, I quietly began buying positions in the vendors, partners, and clients that Avery Systems depended on. I analyzed their operations, their weaknesses, their gaps. 6 months ago, I sent Dad an offer to acquire Avery Systems anonymously through a third party. He rejected it without even reading the full brief. Figures. But the truth was simple. Avery Systems was falling behind. Their tech was outdated, their market share shrinking. And even though he didn't know it yet, I was about to become both Dad's worst nightmare and his only lifeline. The week before Thanksgiving, I sat in my corner office overlooking the San Francisco Bay, signing the final acquisition documents. My assistant stepped in gently. "Your flight for Tuesday is confirmed. Are you sure you want to go alone?" I said, "This one's personal." After she left, my phone rang. Isabel, my closest friend since our early days of scraping by in neighboring studio apartments, didn't even say hello. "While you're really going back there? After everything?" I spun in my chair, staring out over the water. "I need to be the one in the room when it happens. I need to see his face." She hesitated. "I still remember last Christmas. Your dad announced Ethan's promotion, and you had just closed a massive funding round they didn't even bother asking about." I remembered too. I remembered the sting of it. "This year is different," I told her. "Everything changes this Thanksgiving." That night, I packed deliberately. I left behind the casual clothes they associated with the soft, emotional middle child. Instead, I chose tailored suits, a sleek designer dress for Thanksgiving dinner, understated fine jewelry, and the kind of accessories that quietly signal real wealth to people who know what they're looking at. By the time I zipped up my suitcase, my mind was steady. This year, I wasn't coming home as the forgotten daughter. I was coming back as the buyer. In an obvious way, no big logos, nothing screaming for attention. But every piece was quietly, unmistakably expensive. After years of dull sweaters and modest flats around my family, I wanted them to catch small, undeniable glimpses of the life I had built, long before they ever heard the full truth. Tuesday morning, I boarded the private jet I almost never used. I usually flew commercial out of habit, blending in with everyone else in economy while closing deals on my laptop. But this trip, this one called for a little symbolism. During the by the window, tablet in hand, scrolling through the acquisition contract one more time. Clause by clause, I checked everything. The transition terms, employee protections, equity conversions, the final purchase price. It was all in place. It struck me how many times I'd made this exact flight in the past, wedged into a cramped middle seat, juggling cold coffee and a plastic cup of peanuts, quietly grinding toward the empire that now let me land in style. When the jet touched down at a private airfield outside Boston, a black Bentley waited at the edge of the tarmac. Another indulgence I rarely allowed myself, booked intentionally for this return. The driver stepped out, greeted me by name, and took my luggage as if I did this every week. As we pulled away, the city skyline slipped past the window. We drove through neighborhoods I knew by heart, streets I'd ridden my bike through as a kid, back when I believed my father's approval was the only measure of success that mattered. Nostalgia tugged at me, but underneath it was steel. I wasn't that girl anymore. The Avery estate looked exactly as it had in my memory. Imposing colonial lines, tall white columns, the lawn meticulously trimmed, even under a thin veil of November snow. A holiday wreath already hung on the front door, evergreen and ribbon perfectly arranged, as if the house itself were preparing for a magazine spread. I told the driver to wait and stepped out into the biting cold, my heels crunching lightly in the frost on the stone path. I paused at the base of the front steps, took in a slow, grounding breath, and climbed the same stairs I'd walked 1,000 times before, only this time as someone entirely new. Mom opened the door herself, stepping ahead of the housekeeper in her hurry. "Lauren, darling," she exclaimed, pulling me into a perfumed hug. Her eyes flicked over my outfit, lingering on my wrist. "You look different. Is that a Rolex?" "Patek Philippe, actually," I said lightly, hugging her back. "But it's really good to see you, Mom." And she launched straight into chatter about Thanksgiving preparations, seating arrangements, and Chloe's latest social media milestone. I nodded, listening, placing my structured bag gently in the grand foyer beneath the crystal chandelier. Home. Familiar and beautiful, but layered with complicated history. "Your father's in his study," Mom said, lowering her voice slightly as if sharing a secret. "He's been very busy with some big deal. Very hush-hush, even with me." I forced a calm smile. "I'll go say hi before I unpack." Dad Stud explicitly invited. A rich, masculine space full of leather chairs, framed degrees, and business magazines stacked in careful piles. Growing up, it felt like the control center of the universe. I knocked once and walked in without waiting for permission, a small rebellion that felt better than it should have. He glanced up over his reading glasses, surprise flashing in his eyes before it settled into his usual polite distance. "Lockmail. You made it," he said, standing to offer a brief, stiff hug. His cologne smelled exactly the same as it had my entire childhood. "The trip from California was good. Very smooth," I said, lingering near the edge of the room. "I flew private. Saves time." A small frown from many friends were flowing the bruth with partly field. "A little chair with me money. Now, me needs of a limb to left." A small frown in majorship, which waited to reduce the clinics with pring. "Little chair with cover," I said, "friend. Make the shoulder way. I guess the critical post in mime skill my life." A small frown peered between he's exaggerating. "That must have been expensive." I shrugged casually. "Business is good." For a moment, it looked like he might actually ask a follow-up question. Then his phone rang. "Excuse me," he said quickly, already reaching for it. "This is important." He turned his chair toward the window as clipped tones. I let my eyes drift across his desk. Open files, printed emails, a legal pad full of notes. There it was, the Summit Ridge Capital Acquisition Proposal. My company's logo in clean blue across the top. My heart kicked hard against my ribs, but my face stayed neutral. I had imagined this moment for years, and now it was sitting on his desk like any other document he thought he understood. He ended the call and hastily stacked the pages into a folder. "Sorry about that," he said. "Big things happening at the company. You wouldn't really follow the details." The old dismissal didn't sting this time. It floated past me like background noise. "Of course, Dad," I said evenly. "I'll let you get back to it." I left before his staircase up to my old bedroom. Mom had kept it almost exactly as I'd left it. Debate trophies lined up in neat rows, faded computer science competition certificates, MIT pennants tacked to the walls. a museum dedicated to a version of me no one in this house had taken seriously. I washed my face, retouched my makeup, and changed into something slightly more casual but still sharp. Then I headed downstairs. I found Ethan in the glass of amber scotch, even though it was barely 3 in the afternoon. He still had Dad's height and confident posture, but a softer middle and the relaxed, heavy-lidded look of someone who never truly worried about anything. "Well, well," he said, lifting his glass in a lazy toast. "The prodigal sister returns." I gave him a patient smile. "Good to see you, too." "Still playing with computers in California?" he asked, smirking. "How's your little startup doing? Making any money yet?" The way he said little was so deeply ingrained in our family vocabulary that I almost laughed. "Something like that," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. Before he could dig further, Chloe swept into the room like she was stepping onto a stage. Phone held at the perfect angle, front camera open, she filmed herself as she entered. "Guys, look who's here," she announced to her followers. "Family reunion time." She leaned in, air-kissing both my cheeks while still watching the screen. "You look expensive, sis," she said with a grin. "Did you finally land yourself a rich boyfriend?" "No," I said, stepping slightly out of her frame. "Just working hard." "Granklin Garrett brought his new girlfriend," she continued in a mock whisper that was still loud enough for the mic to pick up. "Her name's Amber. She's 24 and does yoga, like, professionally." Ron Q, a tall, willowy blonde, walked in, dressed in perfectly fitted jeans and a soft cashmere sweater. She looked like she'd stepped out of some effortlessly chic lifestyle spread. Ethan immediately pulled her close, one arm sliding around her waist in a possessive gesture. "Amber, this is my sister Lauren," he said. "She lives in San Francisco and does tech stuff." Just like that, a decade of grinding, building, negotiating, and leading was summed up in those 2 words. "Oh my gosh, I love San Francisco," Amber said brightly. "The shopping there is incredible." I smiled politely and made a few neutral comments, but before the conversation could go anywhere, Dad's raised voice drifted down the hall from his study. His tone was animated, excited in a way I'd rarely heard unless he was bragging. "Yes, absolutely," he said, his voice carrying through the doorway. "Tomorrow, after Thanksgiving, $50 million is the final offer. Summit Ridge has been very insistent on the terms." I felt my pulse thrum in my ears. "I'm going to grab some water," I said lightly, excusing myself. In the kitchen, the air smelled like roasting vegetables and spices. Maria, our housekeeper of over 20 years, stood at the island chopping carrots, her movements practiced and efficient. She looked up and her face softened into a genuine smile. "Well, Lauren," she said warmly, "it is so good to see you. You look well. California must be treating you nicely." "It is," I said, stepping closer. "You look great, too. Need any help?" She shook her head, amused. "Your mother wants everything perfect for tomorrow. She keeps saying it's a big day. Your father has news." I gave a small, knowing nod. "So I've heard." It wouldn't surprise me if the staff knew more about what was happening than any of us kids. That was how this house worked. Information flowed where Dad wanted it to. The pre-dinner drinks hour dragged. Mom floated from person to person with forced cheerfulness, refilling wine glasses and adjusting napkins that didn't need adjusting. Dad kept checking his phone like he was waiting for some final confirmation. Ethan bragged about his latest boat purchase, listing specs no one had asked for. Chloe filmed everything for her followers, adding filters and commentary in real time. Taking in the scene. For the first time, it felt like I was observing a play I'd once starred in, but now I was just the one holding the script. "Fleeing dinner is ready," Mom finally announced, her voice a little too bright. We moved into the formal dining room, the same room where every major family announcement had been delivered over the years. The massive mahogany table gleamed under the chandelier. The good china was laid out, the silver polished to a mirror shine, and a sprawling autumn centerpiece. Pumpkins, gourds, deep red leaves ran down the middle of the table in an artfully curated line. Prescribe noticing my place card at the far end of the table. about as far from Dad's seat at the head as physically possible. Ethan sat at his right, Amber beside him, while Chloe took the spot at his left. Mom, as always, sat at the opposite end, with me at her side, symbolically and physically removed from the inner circle of the business talk. Maria and the other staff brought out course after course, a velvety butternut squash soup topped with a swirl of creme fraiche, a harvest salad with candied walnuts and cranberries, and finally, the turkey. 25 pounds of perfectly browned tradition, surrounded by stuffing, roasted vegetables, and bowls of mashed potatoes and gravy. While Chloe narrated into her phone, "And here's Dad carving the turkey, just like his father used to," she said, "continuing the Avery family tradition of excellence in everything we do." I caught Mom flinching at the word excellence before she quickly covered it with another sip of wine. By my mental count, it was at least her 4th glass since I'd arrived. Plate was filled. Dad lifted his glass for our yearly ritual, going around the table to say what we were thankful for. It used to be heartfelt when we were kids. Somewhere along the way, it turned into a subtle competition. Ethan went first, as always. "I'm thankful for another record-breaking quarter at Avery Systems," he declared. I knew from the reports that the company had actually been losing market share for 3 straight quarters, but no one here would challenge the narrative. "I'm also grateful for my new 42-foot yacht, the Avery Legacy," he squeezed Amber's hand, "and for new beginnings with this amazing woman." Redhead giggled and kissed his cheek. Chloe made a dramatic gagging face behind her phone when Ethan wasn't looking. "I'm so thankful to have hit 1 million followers this year," she said. "My collab with Lux Life Beauty has been incredible, and I'm grateful to be in Avery and represent our family brand to the world." She smiled at Dad like a performer waiting for applause. He nodded approvingly, never mind how often he'd rolled his eyes about her career in private. When it was my turn, I set my fork down and folded my hands around the base of my glass. "I'm thankful," I said slowly, my voice steady, "for the lessons life has taught me. That sometimes rejection pushes you toward the right path. That persistence matters more than privilege. And that success, when you earn it yourself, changes how you see everything." I glassed slightly. 2, finding your own way. Dad's expression tightened, like he could feel an edge in my words he couldn't quite identify. But instead of addressing it, he moved smoothly into his own speech about the legacy he'd built, the company he'd grown, and the name he'd made for our family. Mom followed with something soft about family and health, her words slightly blurred at the edges. In the far end at that polished table, quietly sipping my wine, was the person who now held their entire legacy in her hands. Dad couldn't sit still. He kept glancing down at his phone under the table, jaw tightening every few seconds, then leaning toward Mom to murmur something. Her smile grew thinner and thinner, like it was being held together by sheer muscle memory and wine. Ethan dominated the conversation, of course, loud stories about big clients he'd personally impressed, deals he claimed he'd closed with a single lunch. Chloe kept cutting him off to read comments from her followers watching her Thanksgiving with the Averys story in real time. Maria brought out the pumpkin and pecan pies, the warm, sweet smell cutting through the tension hanging over the room. Plates clinked softly as slices were served. I was halfway through my first bite of pecan pie when Dad tapped his knife sharply against his water glass. The crystalline ping snapped every conversation in half. "I have an announcement to make," he said, rising at the head of the table like he was about to address a board meeting. "One that affects everyone here." The room fell instantly quiet. Even Chloe dropped her phone to the table, screen still glowing. "As you all know," Dad began, "I have dedicated my life to building Avery Systems into a leader in our industry. But all good things evolve, and the time has come for change." Prescribe, letting the words hang in the candlelit air. "I've decided to sell the company." "Ethan, Dad, you can't be serious." Dad lifted a hand when in negotiations for months with a very interested buyer. The deal will be finalized tomorrow. Chloe inhaled sharply. "But what about the Avery legacy?" she blurted. "My entire brand is built around being an Avery Systems heiress." "That brings me to the second part of my announcement," Dad said, his expression settling into something unreadable. "The proceeds from the sale will not be going to you children as inheritance." The reaction was immediate. "That's our birthright," Ethan snapped, his chair scraping as he lurched forward. He slammed his fist on the table, rattling the silverware and causing a few drops of gravy to slosh over the edge of a bowl. "What do you mean?" Chloe cried, snatching up her phone again, this time turning it toward herself, capturing her wide eyes and trembling mouth for her audience. "Where is the money going?" Dad waited. "Your mother and I will be retirement," he said. "The rest will go toward establishing the Avery Foundation, a charitable organization to support technology education." "Is unbelievable!" Ethan exploded, pushing back his chair and standing fully. His face was flushed, eyes glassy with a mix of outrage and alcohol. "I've given 10 years to that company. You promised it would be mine someday. You promised all of us." Chloe's filled with tears, though she kept her phone tilted at just the right angle. "My followers are literally watching my life fall apart," she said shakily. "You can't just erase our legacy." I continued to eat my slice of pie, taking slow, measured bites, the crunch of pecans grounding me. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Mom looking at me, puzzled. "Lauren," leaning toward me, "you don't seem surprised." Her voice, the volume at the table, dropped. One by one, their eyes turned toward me, like they were just now remembering I existed. "Actually," I said, setting my fork down carefully and folding my hands in my lap, "I only have one question." I looked straight at Dad. "Who's the buyer?" His chest expanded with pride. He straightened his shoulders, happy to finally reveal the part of the story where he held all the power. "A very successful tech investment firm called Summit Ridge Capital," he declared. "They're paying $50 million, which is more than generous given our recent market challenges." I lifted my water glass, letting the cool rim rest briefly against my lip as I collected myself. The room felt like it was holding a breath. Candle flames flickered. Somewhere in the hallway, the old grandfather clock ticked steadily on. "Dad," I said finally, setting the glass down. My voice was calm and steady. "I am Summit Ridge Capital." For a second, it was as if the sound vanished from the room entirely. No one moved. No one breathed. The only noise was the slow, rhythmic ticking from the next room. I watched the emotions flicker across Dad's face like fast-changing slides. Confusion, disbelief, shock, and then the first sparks of anger. Ethan reacted first. He stood so quickly his chair tipped backward, knocking his wineglass onto its side. Red liquid spread across the white tablecloth, bleeding outward in an irregular pattern that looked disturbingly dramatic in the warm light. "What are you talking about?" he demanded, staring from Dad to me and back again. "What is she talking about?" Chinai was still filming, her hand shaking slightly, but the camera locked onto my face. "Guys," she whispered into the lens, her voice trembling, "did my sister just say she owns Summit Ridge, the company buying our family business?" Mom reached automatically for her glass, found it empty, then pulled the bottle closer instead, filling it nearly to the brim. I stood slowly, smoothing my hands down the front of my dress. After carrying the secret for so long, I felt strangely light. "L. Cooper," I said. "Lauren Elise Cooper. That's the name I've been using professionally for the past decade while building Summit Ridge into a $200 million company." Dad finally found his voice. "This is ridiculous," he sputtered. "Summit Ridge is run by L. Cooper, a respected technology investor, not by my daughter who has been tinkering with startups in California." Reached into my bag and pulled out my slim card case, brushed metal with the Summit Ridge logo etched into the surface. I slid a single card across the table toward him. "You what, Dad?" I said. "I am L. Cooper. I founded Summit Ridge 10 years ago, right after you dismissed my proposal and humiliated me in front of your board." He snatched up the card, staring at it as if it might somehow rearrange itself into something more palatable. His hands trembled almost imperceptibly. "This is some kind of stunt," he muttered, but the certainty had drained from his voice. "Summit Ridge in Nexus Technologies, Data Stream Solutions, and TechCore Industries," I continued, my tone calm, factual. I watched recognition dawn on his face as I listed the names. Avery Systems' 3 largest suppliers. Ethan's eyes widened. "We also recently acquired majority stakes in your 2 biggest clients, McKenzie Manufacturing and Westfield Distribution," I added. "The Avery Systems acquisition is the final piece of a strategic plan I've been executing for the last 18 months. "You've been spying on our business," Ethan accused, his face mottled with outrage. "That's corporate espionage." "No, Ethan," I said evenly, "it's called market research. Everything I learned about Avery Systems came from public financial reports, industry analyses, and legal channels." I turned back to Dad. "The truth is, Avery Systems has been failing for years," I said quietly. "Your technology is outdated, your management style belongs to another era, and you've lost 22% market share in the last 3 years. "How dare you?" Dad began, anger rising. "I towards you first," I cut in gently but firmly. 6 months ago, Summit Ridge sent an anonymous partnership proposal. It would have allowed the Avery name to stay on the company while we provided the capital and technology upgrades you badly needed. Shimmer, his eyes narrowed. I saw the exact moment recognition hit. "The Phoenix proposal," he said slowly. "That was you." I nodded once. "I wanted to give you a chance to accept help without knowing it came from me. I knew your pride might get in the way otherwise. Turns out, I was right." "So this whole time," Ethan said, voice shaking, "you've been plotting against your own family, planning to steal our company?" "Not steely, for $50 million, which, if we're being honest, is more than its current market value." I took a breath, steadying, and let's be very clear. This stopped being our family business the day it became obvious that only one child would ever be given a real place in it, despite that child having no qualifications and no genuine interest in the work. Chloe finally lowered her phone, the reality cutting through the performance. "So you're going to be our boss?" she asked in a small, uncertain voice. "Technically, yes," I said, "though the current management structure will be completely reorganized." Dad suddenly shoved his chair back and stood, the legs scraping harshly against the hardwood. "This deal is off," he said, voice booming. "I refuse to sell my company to my own daughter as part of some petty revenge." I shook my head slowly. "The contracts are already signed," I replied. "The board approved the sale. The press release goes out tomorrow at 9 a.m. Eastern. Legally, Summit Ridge already owns Avery Systems." "I'll fight this," he snapped, though the fear behind his eyes betrayed him. "My lawyers—" "Your lawyers have already vetted the deal," I said, cutting in softly. "They told you it was the best offer you were going to get in this market. What exactly are you going to tell them now? That you want to back out because the brilliant CEO you've been negotiating with turned out to be your daughter?" Mom finally spoke, her words a little blurred, but her gaze startlingly sharp. "All these years, Lauren," she said, staring at me like she was seeing me clearly for the first time. "All these years, you were building this while we thought—" "With you thought I was failing," I finished gently. "Yes, exactly." Dad's palm down on the table again, silverware jumping. "You have a choice to make right now, Lauren," he said. "You can be my daughter, or you can be the person who took my company. You cannot be both." The ultimatum hung between us, heavy and familiar. 10 years ago, it would have broken me. Tonight, it just confirmed what I had already accepted. "That's where you're wrong, Dad," I said quietly. I am both. I always have been. You're the one who refused to see it." Chloe was crying openly now, mascara streaking down her perfectly contoured cheeks. "What happens to us?" she asked, voice trembling. "To our trust funds, our roles at the company?" "That depends," I said honestly, "on whether you're willing to actually work for the company or if you only want the benefits." Ethan pointed a shaking finger at me, his voice raw. "You planned this for Thanksgiving. You wanted to humiliate us in front of the whole family." "Plunged it for Thanksgiving because I knew you'd all be here," I replied, "and because 10 years ago at this same table, Dad announced he was promoting you to vice president, despite your complete lack of experience, while telling me that my MIT degree and 3 years of coding work didn't qualify me for even an entry-level management role." Color rose in Dad's face. "That was different," he snapped. "Ethan is my son, my firstborn." "And there it is," I said softly. The real answer. The one I'd known for years, but needed him to say out loud. "It was never about my ideas, or my education, or how hard I was willing to work," I continued. "It was about the fact that I was never what you pictured when you imagined your heir." Landed in the middle of the table like a grenade, and then nothing. No one spoke. Even Ethan, who always had something to say, stared down at his plate, jaw clenched. Chloe's lashes were still wet with mascara-streaked tears, but for once, she didn't reach for her phone. "Is over," Dad finally said, voice low and shaking with barely controlled fury. "Everyone out. I need to call my attorneys." He shoved his chair back so hard it scraped harshly against the floor. A moment later, we heard his footsteps marching down the hall, and then the heavy slam of his study doors echoing through the house. Mom rose a little unsteadily, one hand on the back of her chair for support. "I should go check on him," she murmured, then paused beside me, her eyes searching my face. "Are you really worth $200 million?" she asked quietly, like she still wasn't sure this wasn't some elaborate performance. "Not once. Yes. And all those times you said you couldn't come home for Christmas because you couldn't afford the ticket?" Her voice trailed off, confusion and hurt mixing together. "I was running a company, Mom," I said gently, "and I needed all